Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gift of Crisis Video Summit. My name is Bridget Jackson-Buckley, and I'm super excited to be with you today, as well as with our guest. The focus of the summit interviews is to talk about the possibilities inherent in our most difficult moments and how we can choose to reframe crisis to see it as a gift. During our conversation today, we'll talk about pre-birth planning and how our guests learn to see crisis as an opening rather than a setback, and the approach he utilizes with clients to understand the challenges in their own lives. Joining me today is Rob Schwartz. Rob is a hypnotist who offers between live soul regressions to help people heal and understand their life plan. His first book, Your Soul's Plan, Discovering the Real Meaning of the Life You Planned Before You Were Born, explores the pre-birth planning of physical illness, having disabled children, deafness, blindness, drug addiction, alcoholism, the death of a loved one, and accidents. His second book, Your Soul's Gift, The Healing Power of the Life You Planned Before You Were Born, explores the pre-birth planning of spiritual awakening, miscarriage, abortion, suicide, caregiving, sexuality, adoption, having pets, poverty, mental illness, and other life challenges and experiences. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Bridget. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so you originally worked in marketing in the corporate sector, but you felt unfulfilled with the work. Was it the lack of professional fulfillment that led you to a professional crisis?
It really was. I was self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different types of corporate writing. And I found it to be very boring, uninteresting, unfulfilling work. It struck me as the sort of work that many people could do, and there was nothing unique about me in that particular role. And I had this longing to do something that was uniquely me, but I didn't have any idea what it was. I didn't even know how to figure out what it was. And so in my search for my soul's plan, so to speak, I started with very conventional routes. I went for career counseling, took the Myers-Briggs inventory, and while that was an interesting exercise, it didn't really tell me what to do with my life. And then I went to a lot of friends and family, and I said, I'm really unhappy doing the corporate work. I feel like there's something else I should do with my life. What do you think I should do with my life? That, by the way, is not a good question to ever ask another person. About half the people I asked literally shrugged their shoulders and said, I have no idea. The other half advised me to do whatever they were doing for a living, which, as you can imagine, was really not very helpful. And so, almost out of desperation, really, I did something that I had never done before. And that is, I went to have a session with a psychic medium. Now, mediumship is not part of my background, which is very conventional. I grew up in a conventional family. I have a conventional education based on the scientific method. And so I didn't even know if I believed in mediumship, but nothing else was helping. And so on May 7th, 2003, I did this. I had my first session ever with a medium, and she started to channel my spirit guides. I didn't even know what a spirit guide was at that time. So she had to stop and explain to me that a guide is a highly evolved, non-physical being with whom we plan our lives before we're born and who guides us through our lives after we come into body. So she started to channel my guides, and they said to me, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. And I just shook my head. I said, well, why in the world would I have done that? And they said, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. And that triggered a major spiritual awakening for me, and one thing led to another. And then 3 years later, I came out with my first book, Your Soul's Plan. And now I have a life that is a unique expression of who I am as a soul, and a much more fulfilling life, doing work that I think really helps people in quite significant ways.
So when you go see a medium, of course, the information coming through is only as clear as the medium is clear. So what gave credibility to the information that you received that triggered the profound awakening?
Well, the most powerful thing was after the guide said, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born, they then proceeded to tell me what all of my biggest challenges had been without me telling them anything about myself. They knew every major challenge that I had faced, And they were able to provide very detailed explanations as to why I had wanted before birth to have those very difficult experiences. So this completely rocked my world. I mean, as you can imagine, if you're talking to beings who know literally everything about you without you telling them anything, that gives them an awful lot of credibility. And so this was the beginning of an entirely new life for me.
So, okay, so then you said you saw the medium and then there was a span of 3 years before the book came out. So what type of research did you conduct? Like where would you, I wouldn't even know where to begin with something like that. That's information coming through.
Yeah, I didn't know where to begin. And I went down a lot of routes that were good learning for me, but they ultimately were not very fruitful. First thing I did really after the session with the medium, I spent the next 6 months, every free second I had reading metaphysical and spiritual literature. So I basically gave myself an overnight crash course in metaphysics, so to speak. And then once I felt that I understood the basics, then I started to try to find some way to research people's pre-birth plans. Now, again, I come from a conventional background. Mediumship is not part of that background. It actually didn't even occur to me, despite my own experience with the medium, I could research people's pre-birth plans by working with mediums and channels, which is what I ultimately did for the 2 books. The thought I had was, well, this was not that long after the internet had come out. I thought, well, we've got the internet now. There are people somewhere in the world who actually remember planning their life. I'll use the internet to find them. So I went to every spirituality message board I could find, and I posted a notice saying, author, writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born. If you remember planning your life, please contact me. And I'll tell you, I started to get thousands of emails from people all over the world, and not a single one of them remembered planning the current lifetime. They were writing in with stories of past lives on Earth, past lives on other planets, non-physical lifetimes, and these were fascinating stories. But there was not a single person out of thousands of people who actually remembered planning the current lifetime. Well, that went on for months. Finally, I began to despair of ever being able to write a book on the subject. It was at that point that I said a very important prayer. I said, dear God, if you want me to write this book, I will, but I need a little help here. And wouldn't you know it, within a very short time of making that prayer, I came into contact with several mediums and channels who in one way or another could find out what somebody planned before they were born. Then those people and I started to work together, and that led to Your Soul's Plan. And then some years later, it led to Your Soul's Gift.
Wow. Well, I can relate to when you said you started reading like every metaphysical book or so much metaphysical literature that you could get your hands on, because essentially when I was in the heart of my own crisis, dealing with financial hardship and being laid off of work, that's when I came across your book. And it was prior to reading your book that I was completely convinced that all of the hardship that we were dealing with was because I was being punished for like something in another life. There was nothing in me that had any type of psychological schema or any reference to say, maybe this was planned prior to birth. It never even occurred to me. And after I read what was formerly known as Courageous Souls, which is now Your Soul's Plan, it completely removed the question of why is this happening to me?
Yeah, I think most people react in the way that you just described. And that's one of the reasons that I'm honored to do the sort of work that I do, because it very much pulls people out of victim consciousness. It helps them to understand that they are the powerful creators of what they experience, which is not the same thing as blaming them for a negative experience. It's an empowering stance that says you have the ability to create the life you would like to have. And it helps people to see deeper meaning in their biggest challenges. When you see the deeper meaning, that diminishes your resistance to the challenges. And diminishing resistance is vitally important to creating the life you want to have, because when you are in resistance to a challenge, you're basically telling the universe no to everything. And it takes it as a global no, a no to physical health, a no to abundance, a no to love, a no to spiritual clarity. So, there's that old saying, when it rains, it pours. That saying is a great description of somebody who's in a state of resistance. It starts with just being resistant to a particular challenge, but then the universe takes it, as I said, as a global no. And so you end up blocking all the blessings that you actually want to have in your life. That's why it's so important to see the deeper meaning of your challenges.
Okay, two questions come up for me when you were just speaking. So the first one was, I'm just curious, the initial response when you first began to talk about this with people, because like, for example, yesterday, I was telling my son, who is almost 20, that I was going to interview you. And I was like, I'm so excited to talk with Rob. We're going to talk about pre-birth planning. And he was like, what? Like he couldn't even. So I was like, okay, I'll just send you one of Rob's YouTube videos. But it was just like that. So what was your experience when you began to talk to people about this? Were you talking with people who were approaching you, or you were approaching them with this concept?
For the most part, when I was writing my first book, it was me approaching other people whose stories I knew were of interest to me. And it took me 3 years on a full-time basis to write Your Soul's Plan. During that time period, I told very, very few people what I was doing. Not only did I not talk about the topic of the book, I didn't even tell most people that I was writing a book. And the reason for that is that I knew most people would react the way you just described your son reacted. And I didn't want to undermine a new project with getting a lot of skepticism from other people. When I was writing the book, I thought of it as a young sapling, a small tree. It's very fragile and vulnerable. And I thought, it's my role to protect this sapling until it grows into a mature tree and can stand on its own. So I really didn't tell many people what I was doing until the book was just about ready to come out. And at that point, if they were going to be critical or skeptical, it didn't matter anymore because the book was finished.
Okay. And then you also said that when you are aware of pre-birth planning, it can take you out of victimhood, and it can remove, or diminish some of the resistance. So, and you were saying resistance when we encounter adversity is like a global no.
Yeah, so when you go into resistance to a particular life challenge, from your perspective, it seems like you're saying no only to the challenge. And that's certainly the conscious intention. But energetically, you're just issuing a big no to the universe. The universe doesn't understand that you intend to say no only in regard to the life challenge. All it hears from you is no. And so it takes it as a global no, a no to every sort of blessing that you actually want to have in your life. And coming back again to that expression, when it rains, it pours. So you start by having a small no to one thing in your life, but because the universe is taking it as a global no, then all sorts of things start to go wrong and it really snowballs. And this is where people get themselves into trouble and they say, I just don't understand what's happening. Everything in my life seems to be going wrong. Well, if you trace it back to the origin, very often it was just a small no to one particular challenge, but then it snowballed from there.
So the rains, it pours, like you get sick, your children are sick, you have a car crash on the way to the grocery store, you stub your toe, like because energetically you're in such strong resistance to a situation in your life that's what you're putting out to the universe.
That's exactly right. One of the mediums I work with in my 2 books, she has a humorous expression to describe this phenomenon. She says that the universe is a short order cook with no imagination. And this is what she's talking about, how it takes a small no in regard to a specific challenge and interprets it as a global no to everything that you would actually like to have in your life. So if you are in resistance to any aspect of your life, you want to do everything you can to diminish that resistance. And one very powerful way to do that is to understand that you are the powerful soul who planned your biggest challenges before you were born. Even if you don't know why you planned them, the simple knowledge that you planned them will pull you out of victim consciousness, pull you out of resistance. If you then also come into some understanding of why you planned the challenges, that's actually even better, because then you can go about learning those lessons in a much more conscious and presumably much less painful
Okay. I mean, I totally can see this. And when I read the book, it resonated deeply with me. It just felt like my body recognized aspects of truth in your writing. But as we're talking about this, I'm thinking, isn't the purpose of adversity, trauma, challenge for us to experience contrast, like a deeper knowing of ourselves as an expression of the presence? And some of these situations, you know, that you write about in the book, uh, illness, disabled children, deafness, blindness, how then do you go through this without having any form of resistance to it? I know that for me, meditation has helped, being grounded, and also just having a much larger framework to hold the experience, knowing that there's a much bigger purpose than I can see with my surface level eyes. I know that something bigger is going through, but still, or a loved one getting a terminal diagnosis. Some of these situations are difficult. So aren't we supposed to feel, what we're feeling? Like we would have to experience the emotion of fear to understand what is not fear. You understand what I'm getting at?
I
Yeah.
do understand what we're getting at, and I think there's an important distinction to draw here between feeling feelings, including what we would call quote unquote negative feelings, and being in a state of resistance. For example, if a loved one dies, you're going to be in a state of grief and it's going to be painful. But that is not at all the same thing as being in a state of resistance to their death. Being in resistance to somebody's death means you feel or believe that it shouldn't have happened, or shouldn't have happened the way it did or at the time that it did. And what I'm saying is you can feel the negative emotions or the positive emotions, as it may be, and not go into a state of resistance, or at least not as much as you otherwise would if you didn't know about the concept of pre-birth planning.
Okay, so what you're speaking to is knowing that adversity is a part of our life. It's a part of why we're here, and to, as best as we can, move into acceptance of really being present in the experience.
Yeah, and I'll give you a recent example. Just yesterday, well, let me back up here. I have to explain that you mentioned I'm a hypnotist. I practice a form of hypnosis called a between lives soul regression, also known as a life between lives regression. And what happens in this kind of hypnosis session is that the client talks to, it's called the Council of Elders. It's a group of very wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee reincarnation on Earth, and they know what everybody's life plan is. So yesterday, I had a client, a young woman whose son died at a very early age. And of course, she's in a tremendous amount of pain. She talked to the council, and the council actually brought her son into her meeting with the council. So there she was talking to her son directly, and he was explaining to her, this was part of our plan. Both of us agreed to this before we were born. The plan was based on unconditional love for each other. It was based on great wisdom. And yes, it's tremendously painful, and it should be, and you should allow yourself to feel that pain. But there's deep, deep meaning in my quote unquote early death. And so she's coming out now from that conversation with her son with much less resistance. The pain is still there, the grief is still there. But now, having talked to him directly about what their life plan was, the resistance is diminished. And that really makes all the difference.
I understand. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So simply having the experience, accepting it, feeling your emotions, and not sitting in, why is this happening to me? As if nothing is supposed to ever happen to you.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it's fine to, for some period of time, ask, why is this happening to me? Because as I understand it, when you ask that question, you literally create an energetic vortex that pulls the answers to you. So there is value in asking that question from a place of spiritual exploration, not from a place of self-pity. It's not intended to be a rhetorical question. It's intended to be a question that brings the answers to you.
Oh, that's a great clarification, Rob. Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so what does the planning process of a pre-birth plan entail?
Well, basically,
What happens?
the life plan is created by the person's soul in consultation with God, ascended masters, spirit guides, perhaps angels. Once the plan is in place, then the incarnating personality, which is a portion of the soul's energy that is going to be placed in a physical body, is informed of what the plan is. At that point, the vast majority of people agree to the plan. And they agree to it because they feel the tremendous unconditional love of their soul and their guides. So they're reassured that this is a loving plan, even if it has challenges in it. And so they agree to it, and then they incarnate. But there's a very small percentage who start to experience human emotions of fear or doubt. If you express fear or doubt about the plan, then your soul and guides will amend the plan, and the soul will come back to you with a revised plan. At that point, the vast majority of the people who express doubt will once again sense the unconditional love of the soul, and they'll agree to the plan and incarnate. But there's a very small percentage who still continue to express fear and doubt. And if you do, then the plan is substantially altered until it's acceptable to you. In other words, no one is ever forced to do anything that they really don't want to do.
Okay, so then I'm curious. Okay, you have the pre-birth plan in place before the soul incarnates, before the soul is actually born into the physical body. So, Robin, what truly is the place of free will? Because if your soul knows where it wants to go, is it truly free will? I mean, if you're being guided to where your soul wants to go.
So when we talk about people having a life plan, it's not correct to say that there's just one plan or just a plan A. There is a plan A, but there's also a plan B, C, D, E, F, and on and on and on. So many so-called backup plans that it's really beyond comprehension. These so-called backup plans are the soul taking into account your free will decisions as the personality once you come into body. So, for example, one of the mediums I work with in the books, she says that when she goes into a person's pre-birth planning session, Spirit shows her something that looks like an incredibly vast and elaborate flow chart. Well, what is a flow chart? It's a series of decision points. If you do A, then X happens. If you do B, then Y happens. The flow chart Spirit shows her is so vast and intricate, it's really beyond human comprehension. That flow chart is the soul taking into account all the possible free will decisions that could be made by the personality. So you do have a plan A, but you've got all these so-called backup plans that are in place. And they're in place so that one way or another, no matter what you decide, you will have many opportunities to learn the lessons you wanted to learn. The difference between plan A and plan Z, so to speak, is that one is much less difficult, less arduous than the other. But either way, no matter which path you're on, you will eventually get to the intended destination.
Okay, so all of the plans that we cannot even compromise have the same desired, if you will, ending. All of the plans preferably would lead to this one ending, but with your free will, you can choose how you want to get there.
You can choose how you want to get there. You can choose whether it's going to be a long or a short trip, whether it's going to be a relatively easy or extremely difficult, arduous trip. And you can actually use your free will to not get to the intended lessons at all. And that is surprisingly common. If that happens, there's no judgment on the part of your soul, but there's a sense of incompletion. So the soul's attitude is, we're not complete here yet. Let's have another lifetime in which we finish learning the lessons that were left incomplete in the past lifetime.
Okay, so then the arduous plan, that on a day-to-day basis, that just looks like difficulty, problems, roadblocks? Is it because at a personality level, you are making choices that are not honoring your soul's impulses when it's trying to communicate with you?
Well, let me share a story to answer that question. A number of years ago, I had a client who at the time was in her 40s. She shared with me the following true story. It took place when she had been in her 20s. When she was in her 20s, she and her daughter, who at that time was 7 years old, were at a swimming pool during the summer. This woman was lying in a lounge chair in the sun. The little girl was playing in the water in the pool. Well, all of a sudden, the little girl jumped up out of the water, ran over to her mother, and said, "You're not waking up the way we planned before we were born, so you're going to have a really bad accident." Well, the mother was horrified, partly because her daughter was saying such a strange thing, and partly the idea of having to have an accident. Sure enough, not long thereafter, she had a car accident which did not trigger a spiritual awakening. About a year later, she had a second and worse car accident, which also did not trigger a spiritual awakening. About a year later, she had a third and even worse car accident, which finally triggered a spiritual awakening. So this kind of pattern where a similar sort of challenge keeps coming back around is very common. And in particular, if it comes back in increasingly intense form each time, that is your soul really trying to get your attention about something. So she wasn't waking up, she wasn't learning the spiritual lesson as she had planned. So the second accident was worse than the first, the third was worse than the second. If you see that kind of pattern in your life, you want to pay very close attention to it and really spend some time thinking about what could be the underlying lessons behind these particular experiences. Because again, that is your soul really trying to get your attention about something. Now, I don't want people to go into fear about that. That's exactly the opposite of what I would like. But just mindful of the fact that this is how it often works.
Well, when you gave that example, that's a very clear example of she's saying you're not getting it, so she had another more serious accident. But I'm thinking about, what about people who are in spiritual communities, spiritually awakened communities, who might be aware of something like pre-birth planning and that there's a larger purpose, but yet they are experiencing the same problems over and over again? Is it a matter of asking the right questions? Like, what if you do feel like you are aware, but you're just missing something? You're just not sure what else to do or what questions to ask to have a different situation, to make the situation change.
So somebody who's having that kind of experience has a number of choices in front of them. There are actually a surprisingly large number of ways to find out about your life plan. One we've already talked about, and that is the between life soul regression. I have a bias, obviously, but I think that's the most powerful way, simply because it's a direct experience. You yourself are talking to non-physical beings and retrieving information on your own. But you don't necessarily have to do hypnosis to find out about your life plan. Astrology, any good astrologer can tell you a lot about it. Numerology is a fantastic way to get insight into your life plan. Palmistry, palm print analysis. Your life plan is encoded in your palm print, and there are people who know how to read that. Dream work. Before you go to bed at night, speak out loud your soul. Ask one question. So it might be, what is my life plan? Ask for a dream that answers the question. This may not work the first time you do it. It takes a little practice, but it's a great way to get an answer to any question. Meditation is another very good way. Automatic writing. If people have not heard the term, they should Google it. It's a way to train yourself to channel information from spirit. So there are many routes that somebody can take to find out what they plan to, why they make those plans. And if you're having the same kind of challenge come back around repeatedly, what you really want to know is the why. Because you can already be certain that you planned it, but if you don't know what the underlying lesson is, you can't go about learning it very easily. And so one of those routes, or perhaps several of those routes, could give that kind of information to someone.
And again, it's whichever route resonates more with you. Like, to ask a question at night prior to falling asleep, I often do that. And I have received answers. I really look forward to going to sleep and dreaming. But I have not asked, what is my life plan? So thank you
Uh-huh.
for that simple suggestions. Okay, so what are the five main reasons that a soul would plan a life challenge? You write about this in your soul's plan. Exploring physical illness, having disabled children, blindness, drug addiction, alcoholism. So, what are the five main reasons to plan these challenges?
The five main reasons I have seen in my research for Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift as to why we plan big challenges before birth are balancing and releasing karma. That's probably the one that people are most familiar with already. The second main reason is healing, which refers to healing unhealed energies from past lives that are brought forward into the current lifetime for the purpose of healing them. Third reason is service to others. In other words, you agree before you're born that you will play some kind of role, and very often it's a quote unquote negative role that challenges somebody else, and that's intended to prompt them to learn a certain lesson. A fourth reason is contrast, which you mentioned. And a fifth reason is correcting false beliefs or false feelings about oneself. When I say false, I mean false from the perspective of the soul. These are feelings or beliefs that were picked up in past lives and again carried forward into the current lifetime for the purpose of healing
them. Okay, so those five, are you choosing one or all of them? Like, would a soul be working on all five reasons or one of five?
Well, service to others is something that I've seen in literally every single pre-birth plan I've ever looked at. That's always there in some form, some shape, some degree to one or another. Among the other four reasons, it's highly likely that more than one of the four would apply to just about everybody. One of the main reasons you come to Earth is for the contrast. It's a realm of duality, up, down, right, black, white, good, bad, and so forth. So if you're coming to Earth, it's pretty much safe to assume that you want to experience contrast. Among the other three reasons, there's more individual variability, and it just depends on what a person has in terms of karma, how much they want to balance and release in the lifetime, and how much healing do they have to do.
The healing one seems like that's a big one. The service one, I definitely see that. I mean, because I feel that very strongly with the writing and the work that I do, wanting to be like a strong pull to be of service. But I thought with healing, it just seems like right now where we are planetary wise, so many people are ill. And so it seems like, is that that must be a collective pre-birth plan for this time of what looks to be like a clearing?
Well, when I talk about healing, when I use that word, I'm actually referring to physical illness, although it could manifest in that. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about healing something more on an emotional or psychological or spiritual level. For example, in your soul's plan, there's a story of a soul who plans to be born completely deaf. And when we go into her pre-birth planning session with one of the mediums, we listen to the conversation she had with her spirit guide when the deafness was planned. And what we find out in that conversation is that in the lifetime immediately before this one, she had the same mother she has in this lifetime. And in that past life, when she was a little girl, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. She was traumatized by that experience, and it actually led her to take her own life in the past lifetime. So she returned to spirit with what you could call an energy of unhealed trauma, which now needs to be healed. She brought that energy of unhealed trauma back into the body for the purpose of healing it. The deafness was chosen so that no similar trauma could happen to her again. That's an example of healing.
Okay. So, okay, all right, that makes sense to me. Okay, so then what about the more traumatic and harder to believe and accept experiences that somebody might actually plan those that you write about in your soul's gift? Can you talk about what you've learned about planning extremely traumatic events like child abuse, rape, and incest? That's difficult to imagine someone will plan that, but
it is very difficult to wrap one's mind around these kinds of things. I think perhaps the best example of planning an extreme challenge is from my first book, Ursula's Plan, in the Accidents chapter. There's a story there about a woman named Christina who plans before she's born to be blown up in a bomb explosion. And she meets in her pre-birth planning session with the soul who's going to plant the bomb, or who is likely to plant the bomb. And they discuss what will happen if she is in the bomb explosion. And she says that she is willing to work with this because she wants to have an incarnation as a gifted healer. And she knows that if she's in this bomb explosion, although it will be very traumatic for a number of years, she will eventually heal herself from the effects of the bomb explosion and then take all of that wisdom and knowledge about healing and turn it outward in service to others. And that's exactly what she went on to do. She became a healer after she recovered from the explosion. And at this point in her life has healed literally thousands and thousands of people. That's an example of why somebody would plan an extreme trauma of some kind.
And would this be a soul that you write about is a highly evolved soul?
In this particular case, yes, this is somebody who has had many incarnations on Earth, very high vibration soul, wanted to be of service as a healer, and chose to go through this experience so that she could develop her healing gifts. It's very common when you want to be of service to plan to go through the particular experience that you yourself would like to help other people with. And if you think about it, that's really the only way you can be a powerful healer. You know, if you haven't had an experience, you can't just ride in on a white horse and start handing out candy bars to help people feel better. That isn't how healing is accomplished. The way it's accomplished very often is that you go through the experience yourself, figure out how to heal yourself first, and then you take whatever you've learned and you offer it to other people.
So within the experience, we are trying to cultivate qualities and presence.
Qualities and presence. And what we're ultimately trying to do is change a vibration. So everything is a frequency. Everything is energy vibrating at a certain frequency. And there's a collectivized vibration with each sort of experience. So for example, incest or rape, which you talked about a moment ago. There's a vibration associated with those experiences. And what we're really doing from her perspective is immersing ourselves into the vibration and then changing it from within, which is really the only way it can be changed. You have to go into the vibration, raise your vibration from within it, and then your vibration causes the whole collectivized vibration to change.
Okay. I mean, of course, I've heard that before, but there was something about the way you just said it that just made it like crystal clear. So there's a vibration of illness, a vibration of financial hardship, or even a vibration of just uncertainty. And so you're going deep within the experience. The experience brings about the emotions associated with that vibration. And as we go within, we are cultivating the qualities and feelings that are healing that and raising that vibration and making it lighter and more loving.
That's exactly right. And when we talk about cultivating qualities, in the workshops that I do, we do something that I call the divine virtues exercise. What I saw in my research for the 2 books is that when souls plan great challenge level, a lot of the discussion in the pre-birth planning session revolved around the soul's desire to cultivate and then express while embodying certain qualities that are very important to the soul. And I gave these qualities the name divine virtues. It's things like unconditional love, compassion, empathy, patience, and so on. There's a list of about 28 of them that have come up more often than others. And people are working on these 28 very, very frequently. And the way you do that is to come into an experience which you see from the pre-birth perspective as providing you with both the opportunity and motivation to cultivate the virtues. So, for example, just to take a common pre-birth plan. Let's say somebody wants to cultivate and express compassion. Someone who wants to do that will very often plan to incarnate in a nuclear family in which they will be treated with a profound lack of compassion. The lack of compassion in the external environment is intended to drive them within so that they cultivate self-compassion. And once they've cultivated self-compassion, then the life plan is to turn it outward in service to others. It's what I refer to as a learning through opposites life plan.
Gosh, it just seems like we have undertaken a massive role here. I mean, this is some serious work because so for the example that you just gave, I thought of someone who is possibly LGBTQ. So that person could be cultivating more compassion for himself, but it's multi-layered because it's also the family members that are having that experience. And it's also the family and friends who are observing that experience.
That's exactly right. And what you just shared makes me think of the very first story in my first book, Your Soul's Plan, is about a soul who plans before birth to have the AIDS virus. And when we went into his pre-birth planning session, we heard the conversation he had with the soul who was agreeing to give him the AIDS virus. And what they talk about is that they were shown scenes of what the human condition is like at this point in linear time. And their impression was that we're burdened by judgments. And they wanted to come in and provide people with an opportunity to put judgment aside and feel compassion in their hearts. And the particular route that they chose to do this was by having the AIDS virus. So, we as a society have all these judgments of people who have AIDS and certain other experiences like homelessness or drug addiction or alcoholism. But the souls who are planning these sorts of challenges are very, very courageous souls. They're taking on challenges that most of us wouldn't dare to take on. And they're doing it in service to us. They're coming in as our teachers and giving us opportunities to put judgment aside and cultivate compassion in our hearts.
Judgment is very strong within our society, and it definitely has had a major role in my life. So what I'm hearing you say and how I can relate it to experiences that I've had is that even though we have our own pre-birth plan, we have our own challenges that we're dealing with, our challenges can also serve as an opportunity for people who are observing our challenges to not judge our decisions and how we choose to.
That's exactly right. So, if for example, let's say that you're walking down the street one day and you pass a homeless person who's sitting in a cardboard box on the corner. If you have a thought like, get a job, that kind of thought really misses the mark, because it's possible that soul was in your pre-birth planning session and agreed to be there as a homeless person at that moment as you walk by, so that you could have the opportunity to put those kinds of judgments aside and choose to feel compassion. That homeless person may be much more highly evolved than you, but because we as a society don't yet understand that this is how things work, we have all these very harsh judgments of people who have certain types of experiences like homelessness or AIDS or alcoholism or drug addiction.
I can totally see that, and that's so funny that you brought up that example, because I had a point here that I was going to make about a homeless person, but then I took it out. But since you're bringing it up, a couple of months ago, there was a homeless person in the parking lot for the grocery store that I go to all the time. Everybody knows it's Trader Joe's, and he was really, I mean, in a wheelchair, really just. He looked like he had all kinds of issues, and he looked like he was taking his last breaths. He was just simply sitting in the wheelchair in the parking lot. And Rob, I don't know what I thought, this man must be here to really just make us go straight to our heart, because the second I pulled into the parking lot, I felt such strong heart energy. And for whatever reason, despite his appearance, so many people were giving him food and money, as opposed to some of the other homeless people that we see in the parking lot. Sometimes people may just pass them by. There was something about this man that just seemed to make us go directly to our heart. And I thought, wow, I wonder if this is like a much bigger experience where his presence is just raising the energy of this space here. And of course, we have no idea how raising the energy, like what it can shift, what awakenings it can spur just for us being in this physical environment.
Yeah, and you know, the people who stopped and gave him food or money or just smiled and maybe said a kind word, you know, all of those people are going to meet up with him again on the other side after this lifetime is over. And the conversation will probably be something like, you know, thank you for having played that role. That really touched my heart as I passed by you in the parking lot that day. And then after seeing you and giving you some money or giving you some food, I went on and I did this and I did that and I did that. And you ended up making a big change in my life just by being there in that parking lot
That is so wonderful. I'm so glad that you said that and brought that up because I can still feel that experience, and that was months ago. I will never ever forget it. So then, okay, so Rob, what is the role of accidents? Are there truly accidents?
I personally don't believe that there are true accidents. I think what we call accidents are either things that we have planned before we were born, or they're things that we call to us vibrationally after we get here. Really, those are the only ways that anything can happen. So by either of those methods, the things we call accidents are not really accidents. It's just a question of, did you plan it before you were born, or did you draw it to you vibrationally after you came into body?
So you mean you can draw it to you vibrationally because your vibration is low? Would you? I mean, I don't know if you would use the word low.
I don't want to use the word low because that can be misinterpreted, meaning someone, and not the way that I look at it. But you could say that the vibration is just something that attracts an accident to you or makes it possible for the accident to happen. In the accidents chapter in my book, there are two stories. One is the woman I mentioned who was blown up in a bomb explosion. The other story in that chapter is about a man who, when he was younger, he was at a party, and there was a swimming pool, and he felt this impulse to dive headfirst into the pool. And he ended up hitting his head on the bottom of the pool and ended up being quadriplegic. And when we worked with the mediums and channels, we spoke to his guides, and we said, how did this happen? You know, how does an accident like this occur? And what they told us was, normally, if the accident is not part of the pre-birth plan, then we would have been there right next to him, whispering in his ear, don't do that. That is not a good idea. Do not jump into the swimming pool. But because he planned this before he was born, we stepped back. And so we just didn't say anything at all. And that allowed him to go ahead and jump into the pool, and then the accident occurred.
Okay. So just to be clear, so there's all of this going on a much bigger level. And so the way for us to be clear that our soul is guiding us it's through loving intuitive impulses. So it is in our best interest and the highest interest of everyone around us to, as best as we can, follow these loving impulses to do certain things, be a certain way, and to follow certain paths. Would that be correct?
That is correct. And that is actually the easiest, simplest, fastest, and most direct way to live out your life plan. You don't have to do hypnosis sessions and go to mediums and channels or astrologers or numerologists. If you just keep asking yourself in any or every situation, what would love do now? And then do what the answer to that question is, you will end up living out plan A while you're here on Earth.
I love that. I love that. The thing about it that makes it so difficult is, what would love do? The answer will immediately come into your awareness. And it seems, from some things that I have experienced in my life, it sometimes seems illogical. It does not seem like the next logical step, even though it feels so wrong. I mean, so right. And for the loved ones surrounding you, it can look like you've just lost your mind. But this is the love
Yeah,
impulse.
and this is where faith and trust come in. Faith and trust are two of the divine virtues that I referred to earlier. You know, it's my understanding that humanity has gotten somewhat off course in the sense that we've become very dependent upon our intellect, our minds. And that was really not the original plan. Humanity was intended to be leaders in feeling, leaders in emotion. And we have gotten away from that, especially in Western society. So I think over time, there's going to be a rebalancing that occurs, and we will make a shift from the head to the heart. And the way to do that, again, is just ask, what would love do now? And then do whatever the answer to that question is.
I actually think that that's happening now, making the shift from the head to the heart. And it's definitely not to say that there's no place for the head, but it can't be all head. There has to be heart.
I totally agree. I think what we want to aim for is having the heart lead the mind rather than the mind leading the heart.
So this is just incredible work you're doing. But so for you, what would you say has been the most surprising or unexpected part in finding a gift in crisis?
I think the most surprising thing to me is how readily and how easily people have accepted the idea of pre-birth planning. You know, when I first came out with Your Soul's Plan, I was really nervous, to be honest with you. And I thought, I don't know what's going to happen here. What are people going to say about this book where I'm claiming that people are planning their biggest challenges? And, you know, there have been skeptics here and there, but really surprisingly few. The overwhelming response has been, this resonates with me. I felt truth in it when I read it. And then people pick up the ball and they run with it. They apply it in their own lives. And that has been very, very gratifying to see.
I am so grateful to have found that book and to have read it. And I can't. I mean, I have told so many people about it just because it's had such a profound effect on my life. So I'm so grateful for it. And you have a free gift for Summit participants. Can you tell us a little bit about that, as well as you have so much information on your website?
The free gift is a large excerpt from my first book, Your Soul's Plan. So it's the introductory matter, the front matter in the book, and then part of the content later in the book, pieced together in a free PDF. But there's a lot of other information on the website, as you mentioned. If people go through the menu, there's a page called Help Yourself. And if you click on that page, it's a listing of resources that I myself have found helped me on my own spiritual path. And so anything that I found helpful, I put on that page, and it's just intended to be a resource to other people.
Yes, I've looked through that page and I've ordered several of the books from the public library, and I just downloaded the free 7-day course. I think it was 7 days for inner bonding. I've never heard of that, but I just started reading that. So again, it's on Rob's website, which is yoursoulsplan.com. And you can go to Help Yourself for the free resources, and I will include the link for the free excerpt from the book, which can be purchased wherever books are sold. And also, Rob has a call for you if you would like to help to get the book into libraries and prisons. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. My mission is to get healing information about pre-birth planning to as many people as possible, including the many people who either can't afford to buy books or just don't have access to them. And so I am very happy to donate books to libraries or to prisons. And if anybody who hears this interview would like to have books to donate to your local library or to take to a prison where perhaps you're doing some volunteer work, I'm happy to send those books to people. Just contact me through my website at yoursoulsplan.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob. I could talk to you. I could just go on and on. Thank you so much for your time and the work you're doing. It is extremely important and extremely beneficial at this time. I can't recommend it enough. Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift by Robert Schwartz. Thank you for being with us today for the Gift of Crisis Video Summit.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. And let me also thank you for the very valuable and very important work that you're doing. I think of you as a great light worker, and I'm very happy that you're out there doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.